Hello and welcome. Welcome to our Banned Book Week webinar. I'm Donna Smith and I'll be moderating the discussion with Cameron Craig. We both work at Center of Life Social Justice Resource Center and welcome you to be a part of this learning experience.
Hi, my name is Cameron Craig. I am the coordinator of the Ambassadors of Justice, which is a part of the Social Justice Resource Center here at Center of Life.
We are joined today by three panelists, Eric Stroshane, Helen Campbell, and Ryan Woodward, for today's discussion entitled, Why Are Books Being Banned Across the U.S.? To open up the discussion, Cameron and I will read their short bios, and then we will move into questions and answers. Eric Stroshane has nearly 2 decades of experience working in libraries and engaging with issues of censorship and surveillance. He received a master's in library science from Indiana University, Bloomington, and a master's of arts in English from the University of Buffalo. He is currently the news editor for the Journal of Intellectual Freedom and Privacy and manages the Hazelwood neighborhood location of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh.
Helen Campbell is co-owner and CEO of Stories Like Me, a woman-owned, queer-owned store. Intentionally inclusive children's to young adult bookstore whose mission is that all children and families can see themselves in stories. After a career in TV and film production and project management, Helen and her 2 adult children began this journey of bringing books to the community. Opening in Greenfield in October, Stories Like Me is an accessible space which welcomes all. Okay. And Ryan Woodward earned his Master's of Arts in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Westchester University of Pennsylvania and Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Pittsburgh. Ryan has conducted research projects, and consulted for several education organizations in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Illinois. Originally from Kentucky, he is a librarian, writer, and educator living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Cam. And thank you all for agreeing to be a part of this discussion. Welcome. At Center of Life, we focus on making sure that the people who we serve have representation in all of the systems that affect them. This includes making sure that they have access to reading material and information that represents them. We honor their voices and believe that they should be heard no matter what their age. You all have chosen careers in library science and book selling, and this week is named Book Banning Week. Can you explain what it means to ban or challenge a book? Eric, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you, Donna. So when a book is challenged, like what we use that term to refer to is when, like in a public library setting, like if a patron or other just resident in the service area requests that the library remove a title from their bookshelves. In a school setting, this would be, requesting that a school remove a book from the curriculum or from a school or classroom library. So that's what a challenge is. It's just that actual request to remove the item. And then the actual banning of an item would take place like after a committee has reviewed the request and the material that's been challenged. And if they have then at that point determined the item should be removed from the library, the school, the curriculum, etc. So the actual removal of the material from a place where it is publicly accessible to a great many people is the act of banning it.
Thank you. And Helen, is it a little bit different for a bookseller when are books banned by booksellers and are challenged by booksellers?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. And we are in the fortunate position as an independent store, like many independent stores, we actually want to bring awareness to banned books, and we want to highlight the process that's happening around the US. So as independent bookstore owners, we have that ability to choose what we sell in our stores, and banning a book does not affect us as business owners in that way.
Thank you. So you guys have explained the process. Thank you so much for that. So, Cam?
I just want to ask Helen, have you experienced any challenges firsthand?
Yes, and I think that perhaps this comes from the fact that I pop up. My bookstore is not only going to be a brick and mortar store, but also I appear in neighborhoods, in cafes, in market squares, where there are no doors for people to have to step through. So yes, I'm just thinking about 2 weeks ago, I was at an open air market, and I had the book, The 1619 Project, Born on the Water, which was on display, and a young child came in and he expressed interest. His mother took the book from him and hid it in my bookstore, in my stand. And of course, when they left, we put it back, and the next person in purchased the book. Yeah. But I have other books that have been out on display, and people have expressed their displeasure with the fact that I have these books available to the public.
That's interesting that someone felt the nerve to hide something within your establishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Eric, what books are most likely to be challenged?
Oh, that's a great question, Cameron. So, the Office for Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association has tracked this since the early 90s. They've got a pretty extensive database on this. And there have been some changes over time. In 2021, the titles that were most frequently challenged were those with LGBTQIA+ characters, themes, or authors. And the next most challenged area were those with Black, Indigenous persons, and people of color as characters or authors. And that also includes like a lot of books dealing with themes of race and racism, gender identity and sexual identity. So like the 5 most challenged titles in 2021, and 2021 was the year that to date has seen the most challenges and book bannings since OIF started tracking this. But the most challenged titles from last year were Genderqueer, a memoir, Lawn Boy, All Boys Aren't Blue, Out of Darkness, and The Hate You Give. So that was nationwide. And there were a total of just over 4,000 titles challenged last year, which includes almost 1,600 unique titles, so different titles. And those took place in about 730 different cases where challenges were brought to schools or libraries.
And Ryan, what books have you seen challenged in your time as a librarian?
So I'm kind of a special case in that most of my experience professionally has been in either academic libraries at colleges and universities or special libraries at museums. So I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with book bannings or challenges within my own establishment like Eric or Helen are going to tell you about. But this is, I think it's really important that Eric brought up which books are most commonly challenged. We've talked about this before, where it's common to see, especially on social media, it's Banned Books Week and people are behind that, and you love the support and you love the, the activism, but a lot of the books that are being held up as examples were maybe the most challenged books 30 years ago, you know. And certainly they still probably receive challenges in some libraries, but yeah, if you look back at the information on what's been challenged most frequently, easily over the last 10, 15 years, they are books related to sexuality, they're books related to race. And it's real important, I think, just to know that from the beginning, if that's what we're talking about right now, and to try to understand why people want to challenge them in the first place.
Thank you. So, what are the different means that people use to challenge books, and who are making these challenges? Is there a specific group or a certain maybe certain sections of the country where there's more challenges that happen? But I'm just curious about who are the people who are challenging books in general. And I'll
Well,
ask that to Eric.
I was just about to jump in on that one. Thank you, Donna. Yeah, so you know, there's kind of this baseline. Historically, you know, the people who would challenge books would typically be bringing challenges about books targeted at kids like age 4 to 6 or ages 14 to 16, kind of like these significant developmental periods. And what we saw prior to last year was generally just, you know, individual parents, grandparents, caregivers, raising objections about, like, in schools, a book in the curriculum, in public libraries, you know, maybe something that their kid brought home or that was part of a display, like pride displays are frequently targeted. What really changed last year was the emergence of an organized effort to remove books primarily from schools, but also from public libraries. So these are groups like Moms for Liberty, which now has a chapter in Allegheny County, groups like No Left Turn in Education, Mass Resistance has been kind of involved in there, an anti-LGBTQ hate group. So there are a lot of kind of forces pushing towards these efforts, and we've seen, like, some of it start to emerge on the legislative side as well, which I don't think I'm going to delve into just for purposes of time and to keep things focused on the book challenges.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the really huge shifts. And I guess the other thing is that as organized groups have started leading the charge, they are bringing large lists. So instead of targeting like a single book at a single school or a single library, they're targeting like a list of sometimes hundreds of books at an entire school district or at a public library. So these are obviously not just like books that their kid just checked out, right? It's just like there's a clear agenda.
So this isn't necessarily parents who are concerned about their own child's reading list. It's just more of an organized effort that you're talking about, where they're trying to take these books away from members of the community outside of their families. Is that right?
Yeah. So it is. I mean, it is correct, but it's also a bit more nuanced. So it's so these are large, like, national groups and organizations, but they also have like local chapters, like county to county throughout the US. So there are still, locals who are involved, but kind of the organization behind it is not taking place at the local level, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see. So what happens if a person wants to read a book and it is banned in their local library or in their bookstore? That person, how does that person get access to that book, if specifically in a library, if they don't have money to purchase it via Amazon or whatever?
You're right. So that's the people who are affected most, like the kids, the teens, like, who can't, purchase the book themselves, or who are in families who can't, afford to get the books themselves. If it's kind of the irony is, if, a library has withdrawn a title as the result of a reconsideration process, has effectively banned it, or a school has, there's still interlibrary loan. So with the card that they hold, they can still request that the book be delivered to them from another library. So that's like something of a saving grace, but it's not that you lose the kind of browsing the shelf, the kind of in-person discoverability, and you also lose the immediacy of access to it.
Sure.
And I think I want to add in there, Eric, you mentioned, and I want to circle back just a little bit to the people organizing this, and say that my experience and my impression of this as an independent bookseller who has been confronted is that it's a lot about fear and power. And it's about who holds the privilege in the room. And if, and I, as a white woman, hold oodles of privilege, and I'm choosing to disrupt things with that privilege. But the people that challenge me are the people with the privilege in the room. Wow. And so I think that not only are we losing the opportunity for critical thinking and that browsing experience that you talk about, Eric, but we are really seeing the power of fear at work. And this is one way that they are choosing to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the two words, fear and control. You know, makes you wonder exactly what they're afraid of, and, you know, and why do they want to use control over other people?
Right, exactly.
If I can just go off of what Helen just brought up,
sure.
And Eric, for, you know, what options do people have for finding books that have been maybe removed from, you know, what they have access to locally? You know, we've seen some libraries, some very prominent public libraries are offering, you know, free access to online books, library cards, you know, digital library cards. There are efforts being made, but if you pay attention, every time this happens, there are also efforts to try to curtail that, right? There's the teacher who got in trouble for recommending that her students pursue, you know, digital library access through an out-of-town library. So I think ultimately, if once this starts, you have to be prepared for a bit of a fight. You have to be prepared for thinking outside the box and how you want to get access to appropriate information for what you're looking for. And yeah, it just doesn't stop with the challenge, you know, even if the book has been removed from the library. My thinking is always challenge it right back, you know, approach the library, talk to the library, going to the meetings. These things are all important, and it's an ongoing struggle, but it's an ongoing process.
That's interesting that you say challenge it right back. So if a book is banned and removed from the library, is there a way to challenge the ban that has already happened?
So this is difficult to speak to generally, just because every library and every school district kind of have their own policies governing these procedures. Ideally, the time to push back is before it happens. Okay. Right. And I should say, you know, it's part of kind of like the code of ethics of professional librarians to oppose efforts to censor materials. Like there's something called the Library Bill of Rights that we strive to adhere to, and you know, the freedom to read statement, that we want to make like books on all different topics, articulating all different viewpoints and representing all different peoples, available like freely to everyone, and without any kind of judgment to who's reading what or why they might be reading it. Like that's just, we are opposed to this. But as like public tax-funded community entities, like people have a say, right? So that's why there are these procedures in place, and how members of the community are allowed to kind of challenge the decisions of, you know, professional educators and professional librarians.
Great. Cam?
So for both Ryan and Eric, who chooses books to be in a library?
Well, again, I think this is going to be up to so much of what we're going to talk about today is on a case-by-case basis. It's kind of up to the individual library, you know. Most libraries are going to have selection committees. They're going to have boards that they have to answer to. The director may have a final say. The board may have a final say. And then all of this can go out the window with organizations like I've worked for, you know, museums, special libraries, special collections, archives. They're all going to have their different governing boards. So yeah, it depends on how every library is structured, who is selecting materials, who is weeding those materials, you know, when things need to be deaccessioned, and who is responsible for removing them from the shelves if it gets to that point.
Thank you.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add to what Ryan said is that, you know, libraries also have collection development policies. So they're just like there are, you know, there's a process for how books can be challenged in a collection. There's also like a process and like set of procedures in place for how materials are selected. And part of this is just to ensure that in the event that challenges come up, like there is like good justification for why that book was there to begin with. And part of it is just like, you know, being, you know, it's good stewardship of, you know, public funds and of making sure that, you know, the shelf space, which is valuable, is being well utilized and that everything has a reason for being on it. So yeah, it's librarians, it's teachers who make those choices.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk about challenging books, is age appropriateness a valid reason to challenge a book within a library? I guess this is open to the group.
I can start if you want, just because this is something that's always on my mind as far as the work that I've done. I appreciate Eric bringing up before who's challenging books and for what reasons. A lot of times we'll see it's, you know, just to protect children. I think an important difference to understand from the beginning is, are we protecting them from material they are maybe incapable of processing, or are we just protecting them from perceived corruption, right? So my first grad school experience was a Holocaust and genocide program. So I read years of very dry academic heavy material. But what I found once I graduated, anybody who talked to me who wanted to know more about what I did and what I now knew was always recommendations for young readers. And immediately, once I graduated, I had no idea what to tell them, you know, because I had not been reading that material. So I really worked on that for a number of years. And my work, you know, at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, for example, this was probably the top thing that I did as far as making recommendations. They were to students, to teachers, and to the public. They wanted age-appropriate recommendations, you know, and I always give the very general example of, you know, let's say my niece is 10 years old. She just read a book about Anne Frank, and she understands what the Holocaust is. She wants to learn more, but she doesn't want to be, we don't want her traumatized by what she's reading. And I can completely understand that because it's a heavy topic. So I know I might be a unique case, but it's why I'm happy to be here with you all today, because I know we do very similar work. You are constantly engaged in uncomfortable conversations about difficult histories. It needs to be done appropriately and, you know, with compassion and understanding for reading levels for different people. So another thing I want to always remind people of is when you see stories about book burning and book banning, it's an easy mistake to make, right? A lot of times they can include sensationalist headlines. You know, this book was removed. You know, this book was, you know, from what? The library, from a classroom, from the entire state? We don't know. That is always the time, I think, to think critically and learn more. Is the book being removed from a curriculum in favor of something newer, you know, that might be more effective for students? Or is it simply just being pulled from the classrooms and libraries because of a complaint? So there needs to be a lot of important discussions to understand before grouping everything under the umbrella of book burning, I think is an important first step. But yeah, just some of the work I've done, I do want people to know that librarians, booksellers, writers all do take it very seriously to consider what's out there, to know what's new, what's been recently published, so that they can make decent recommendations to people that more closely align with what people are looking for. It is difficult. It's a lot of what I did at the center. I was constantly making book lists, recommendations for teacher trainings or for public events, what is appropriate. A lot of thought and time goes into that effort. And yeah, I'm just librarians, booksellers, we take it very seriously.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to just ask Eric if he's experienced this, that I read a fair number of the middle grade books that I stock. That's kind of, I read all the picture books and I read some of the middle grade books, and my adult children read the YA. And middle grade books tackle very difficult subjects, and they tackle the experiences that kids are actually having, whether we would like to protect them from this or not. There are kids who have a friend who has felt suicidal. There are kids whose grandparents have been traumatized by growing up throughout the war, and how that affects their family dynamic. So I think that when you talk about age appropriateness, I absolutely agree that you need to scaffold certain things, and that certain things need external supports, like, as I mentioned, suicide is one. But at the same time, our young people are already talking about all of these things. And if you take away the opportunity for them to read how somebody else experienced that, how they healed from what the trauma or the experience, and how they are moving on with their life with a deeper understanding and greater compassion for both themselves and the world, you take away a huge opportunity to make, to give that person some relief from what they're already experiencing.
Thank you, Helen, for that. It was very powerful.
Yeah, that is incredibly insightful. And right, so kind of the threads that I'm kind of want to play with a little bit is, okay, so there is age appropriateness in terms of what level a child is reading at. There is age appropriateness in terms of the child's maturity level. And you can, both of those things, like, they can be unrelated. And so kind of selecting a book, like Ryan was suggesting, can, has a lot of challenges inherent in it. But there is also, I think, the disconnect between what makes parents uncomfortable and what children really, really need some kind of like external assistance with processing, making sense of, coming to grips with. The books that are being challenged, like historically, like, and will always be books that have some difficult ideas, things that people really need to struggle with, and that are social struggles, sometimes political struggles, and oftentimes like personal struggles or identity struggles. So books that are being challenged are ones that are just like challenging to read. There's things that have to be grappled with, and to take away that kind of representation and that opportunity for youth to have that in a kind of structured environment, in a supported environment, whether it be in a classroom with teachers kind of guiding conversations, or even just to bring a book home and to have that book serve as a tool that their parents guide them with, or if it's independent and it's just like what the author put out there and what they're able to take in and wrestle with is incredibly important. So age appropriateness is challenging for a lot of reasons, but I guess what I've learned is you have to kind of trust the kids. Like the little dude I live with, I mean, he's ready to read some things and he's not others, and he'll just put them down, like, or he'll like be like, nope, I'm just gonna shut down if if he doesn't want to talk about something. So that's fine. And it's just like you gotta know your kid, and you gotta learn and grow with them. And then the last thing I'm going to say, because I've been talking a little while, is there's a huge difference between making a choice, like with your child, about what they're going to read, and then making a choice on behalf of like a community or the rest of the people, the rest of the families in the school, about what they can read and what their kids can.
I love what you said, all three of you, about how it's the individual, right? And each child is at a certain level, and it's so important for parents to have conversations with their own children. And, and those books open up so many dialogues that, to make it easier for parents to have these conversations with their kids and to guide them, in many different, in the ways that the parents want to lead them. So do we lose diversity of thought when we ban books? I think I know what the answer will be from our panel, but let's just go from Eric, Helen, and then Ryan. Do we lose diversity of thought when we ban books?
Yeah, so that's the most painful and the most dangerous thing, right? Books that are in a library or in a school are just very publicly available to the students, the community members, and anytime that you take books that have been carefully selected out of that environment, you are taking away someone's voice, someone's representation, someone's story. And a lot of times people say, oh, this book is dangerous, or there are dangerous ideas in this. I would posit that the actual danger comes from a lack of information, because then you cannot make informed decisions, then you cannot build community, then you cannot experience empathy for others. So having representation and having the opportunity to also learn about others' lived experiences is one of the great things that books give us.
Thank you, Eric.
So as a parent of a non-binary adult child, representation for me is extremely important. And if you take that away, you take it out of public circulation, then that devalues that person's existence. And it's like trying to take them out of history. These people don't exist. These people don't belong. There are no stories about these people. So I feel very strongly about the loss of voice. And I mean, our mission is that all kids and all families get to see themselves in stories. But if I was to sort of make that even smaller, it's like we want to make, kind of humans through books. And the way we do that, and it was Dr. Bishop who used this phrase, is that books act as mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. So you've got a book in just the right light, it reflects that person's experience. Yeah. And they feel seen and they feel valued and they feel like they belong, that they're part of this community. And if you're reading books about people that are different from yourself, you get that window into what that person's life is like. And depending on the book, be able to step into that through that sliding glass door. And we build compassion by learning about the way other people experience the world. And so when you remove books from the shelves that represent people who are genderqueer, people who are exploring that part of their existence, you deny that they exist. And for me, it's unacceptable.
Yeah, thank you for that, Helen. Ryan, you have anything to add?
Nothing that's going to top that. Those are both very powerful examples. I'm going to bring it back and make it more personal, perhaps, though. I think about when I first get that kind of question, I think about what were my reasons for going to library school in the first place? And ultimately, it was a very basic, I want to help people find what they're looking for, what they're interested in, because I know how important that was to me growing up and at several different stages of life, right? I have been working in Holocaust education about 12 years now. I'm really proud of the work I've done. It's been a different places, different programming, it's been a very diverse effort. It's looked a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. But I'm proud of the work that I've done there. And you can trace that back to where I'm 9 years old. And, you know, I found my first book on Anne Frank, and I just got very hooked on the story and the history and what was this all about. And I was probably reading things that you wouldn't recommend, you know, a 10-year-old read about some very ugly parts of history, but this is still shaped like who I am now. And I am proud of the work that I'm doing now. The other thing I think of is I joined a book through Carnegie Library, a book group. This was the Lavender Book Group. I think it has a different title now, but this was the LGBTQ plus reading group a couple of years ago. And one of my favorite things about this was it was a multi-generational group. We had teenagers in the group. We had people my age, you know, in their 40s, 30s and 40s. And then we had people who were in their 80s. And to be able to bring in everyone's perspective, regardless of what book we were talking about, was amazing, one. Two, this was where I got back into graphic novels. We read Fun Home, and I had not read graphic novels in a long time. You know, I'd been doing this serious study and going to grad school for twice in like 6 years. So I missed out on a lot of this type of stuff. And just this year I read Gender Queer. And the first thing I think about, aside from how much I just enjoy these books, was I can't imagine what this means to somebody right now who is just now exploring these things. What if I had these books when I was, 14, living in Western Kentucky, and, just you didn't see a lot of things like this growing up. So I know how important they are to people now, even to people who later in life are going to connect with the material. Everyone's able to connect with the material. I still read a ton of kids' books, and it's not just so I know what to recommend to people who ask me. I like them. You like what you like, and you should have access to it. So do we lose diversity of thought when we ban books? Absolutely. I think that's implied in the question itself. You're going to lose that. People should have access to what they want to read and what they want to learn more about. And this is the whole reason some of us go into book selling, go into writing, go into librarianship, is to help people do just that.
Thank you, Ryan.
So, what are some things we can do if we see books being challenged in our communities?
I'll throw out a few.
There we go.
So, I mean, just like one thing, base level, if you hear people starting to talk about like challenging or banning books, like read the books, like, read the books, share them with people you love, with your friends, with your family, talk about them, start conversations, start ban books clubs. If you have a child in a school district where, some kind of book banning process is underway, attend, speak out. Let the administrators and the board members there know that there are also parents in the community who value these books and whose children need access to these books. Yes, that's like passing.
Great.
And I would like to add in there, Cameron, vote. From your school board up, it all matters. So it's not just important to vote in a general election. It's very important to pay attention to the local community and what is being built locally, and use that privilege that we have to express our opinions through voting.
And I would just like to follow both of them up with make friends with your local booksellers, make friends with your local librarians. They are going to love that. We are fortunate in Pittsburgh to have such a robust system of public libraries in this entire region, as well as both corporate and independent booksellers. They are there. Everyone is geared towards public service, I feel like, in this respect. And they are there to help you find these things. And they need to know that you support them as much as they need you to know that you are supported by them.
Thank you, guys. This was a wonderful webinar. I will do the I will do the clapping too. I really appreciate you guys giving us your time and explaining, you know, just what this week is all about. And I agree with Eric, yeah, that we should read these books that are being challenged and banned and find out, you know, exactly what they're saying, because I believe they're saying some very important things. So Cameron and I just appreciate you all and just thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.